the brutal winter of 1888, the Wyoming high country was a graveyard for the unprepared. Silence was the only law, and survival was the only religion. But for Jeremiah Kincaid, a mountain man hiding from his own violent past silence was about to be shattered. When a blizzard delivered a half-frozen grandmother and a terrified boy to his doorstep, he thought he was just saving 2 lost travelers. He had no idea he was sheltering the territory's wealthiest heirs, or that the most ruthless killers in the West were tracking their footprints in the snow. This is the true-to-life story of the Sterling Rescue, a tale of grit, gunpowder, and a secret that almost burned the Rockies to the ground. The wind didn't just blow in the Bighorn Basin. It screamed. It was a physical thing, a wall of white ice that scoured the granite peaks of the Rockies and buried anything foolish enough to be caught in the open. Jeremiah Kincaid knew the wind better than he knew most people. At 45, he was a man carved from the very timber he lived, among tall, broad-shouldered, with a beard the color of iron filings, and eyes that had seen too much of the worst of humanity during the Civil War. He lived at an elevation of 8,000 feet, in a cabin fortified with notched pine logs and mud chinking that had hardened like concrete. Down in the valley they called him the Ghost. They said he was a deserter, a saint or a demon, depending on which saloon patron you asked in the town of 10 Sleep. Jeremiah didn't care. The mountains didn't ask questions. It was late afternoon on a Tuesday in January. The barometer on his wall, an old brass thing he'd salvaged from a riverboat years ago, was dropping fast. A blue norther was coming. Jeremiah pulled his buffalo hide coat tighter, checking the line of beaver traps set along the creek. His breath plumed in the air, thick as smoke. Beside him, his dog, a massive brute named Sarge, suddenly stopped. The dog's hackles rose a low growl rumbling in his chest. "What is it, boy?" Jeremiah whispered, his hand instinctively drifting to the worn walnut grip of the Colt Peacemaker on his hip. Sarge bolted, not toward the traps, but up the ridge toward the old logging road that had been abandoned since the silver bust of '83. Jeremiah cursed and followed his snowshoes, crunching rhythmically. He crested the ridge and stopped dead. There, half slid off the icy track, and wedged against a massive ponderosa pine was a carriage. Not a wagon, a carriage. It was black lacquered with heavy spoke wheels and brass trimmings that looked absurdly out of place in this savage wilderness. One horse was down, a leg broken thrashing in the snow. The other had snapped its traces and vanished. Jeremiah moved fast. He approached the driver's seat. The man slumped. There was covered in a layer of frost. Jeremiah brushed the snow from the man's coat and checked for a pulse. There was none. But it wasn't the cold that had killed him. Jeremiah's gloved finger traced a neat round hole in the back of the driver's heavy canvas duster. Rifle shot. Long range. This wasn't an accident. It was a hunt. A muffled sound came from inside the carriage. Jeremiah wrenched the door open. Huddled under a pile of expensive fur blankets were 2 figures. One was a woman, perhaps in her 60s, though her face was etched with a terror that made her look older. She wore a hat with a crushed velvet flower and a coat of fine wool that cost more than Jeremiah's cabin. Clutched in her arms, shivering violently, was a boy no older than 8. The woman looked up, her blue eyes sharp and defiant, despite the freezing cold. She held a small pearl-handled derringer in a shaking hand, pointed straight at Jeremiah's chest. "Stay back," she croaked, her voice brittle. I will shoot." Jeremiah didn't flinch. He just looked at the tiny gun, then at the dead driver, then at the darkening sky. "Ma'am," Jeremiah said, his voice like gravel grinding together, "that toy won't stop me, and it certainly won't stop the blizzard that's about 10 minutes out. Your driver is dead. Your horse is done. You can shoot me and freeze to death, or you can put that away and let me get you and the boy to a fire." The woman hesitated. She looked at the boy, whose lips were turning a dangerous shade of blue. The fight drained out of her. She lowered the gun. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Name's Kincaid," he said. He reached in and effortlessly lifted the boy into his arms. "Now move, unless you want to be a statue by morning." The cabin was small, but it was warm. A cast-iron pot-belly stove roared in the center, fed by split oak. The smell of drying wool and venison stew filled the air. Jeremiah moved with efficient silence. He had settled the woman and the boy on his bunk, piling them with quilts. He fed them broth, spoon by spoon, until the color returned to their cheeks. He hadn't asked them a single question since they arrived 3 hours ago. He knew better than to push terrified prey. He sat in his rocking chair by the fire, cleaning his Winchester 1873. He oiled the lever action methodically, the metallic clicks the only sound in the room. "You're not a trapper," the woman said suddenly. Jeremiah didn't look up. "I trap." "You move like a soldier," she countered. She was sitting up now, holding a tin cup of coffee with both hands. The expensive wool coat was hung by the door, revealing a dress of black silk that was wrinkled and stained with travel. "And you saw the bullet hole in my driver, didn't you? You didn't ask how the carriage crashed." Jeremiah finally looked at her. In the firelight, he saw she wasn't just old. She was steel-spined. There was an aristocratic tilt to her chin that reminded him of the officers' wives back in Virginia. "I saw it," Jeremiah said. "I also saw that you're carrying a bag that clinks like it's full of silver dollars, and you're wearing shoes that have never touched mud. You ain't from around here, Mrs. Smith," she lied smoothly. "Beatrice Smith. And this is my grandson, Toby." Jeremiah smirked. "Right, Mrs. Smith. And I'm the President of the United States." He stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the blizzard was raging. Visibility was 0. "Look, lady, I don't care who you are, but whoever shot your driver is likely waiting out this storm just like we are. And when the snow clears, they'll come looking for the carriage. If they find it, they'll find my tracks. So you'd best start telling me the truth. Are you running from the law?" "No." The boy spoke for the first time. His voice was high and frightened. "We're running from Mr. Knox." Beatrice gasped and put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Hush, Arthur." Jeremiah turned slowly. "Arthur thought his name was Toby." Beatrice closed her eyes, letting out a long, defeated sigh. When she opened them, the haughtiness was gone, replaced by desperate vulnerability. "His name is Arthur Sterling," she said quietly. "I am Beatrice Sterling. My husband was Archibald Sterling." Jeremiah froze. Everyone in the Wyoming Territory knew that name. Archibald Sterling was the Copper King. He owned the Sterling Mining Combine, the largest operation west of the Mississippi. He was worth millions, and he had died 2 weeks ago in a hunting accident near Cheyenne. "The papers said your husband shot himself cleaning his gun," Jeremiah said, his eyes narrowing. "My husband knew firearms better than he knew his own children." Beatrice spat bitterly. "He was murdered by his partner, Colonel Thaddeus Knox. Knox wants the company, but he can't have it." She gestured to the small boy. "Not while Arthur is alive. My son Arthur's father died in the war. Arthur is the sole heir to the sterling fortune. Knox needs him removed." Jeremiah looked at the boy. Arthur was small, pale, with big brown eyes that watched Jeremiah with awe. He looked nothing like a threat to anyone, yet he was worth a kingdom. "Colonel Knox," Jeremiah muttered. He knew the name. Knox was a former cavalry officer who had been dishonorably discharged for massacring a peaceful Arapaho village 10 years back. He was a butcher who hired men that were even worse. "They ambushed us on the pass," Beatrice explained, her voice trembling. "We were trying to get to the railhead at Casper to get back east to my lawyers. They killed our driver, Thomas. We only escaped because the horses bolted." She looked at Jeremiah, her eyes pleading. "Mr. Kincaid, you have to help us. Knox has hired the Dead Eye gang. They are tracking us. If they find us, they'll kill you both." Jeremiah finished. He looked around his cabin. It was sturdy, yes, but against a hired posse led by a man like Knox, it was a coffin. Jeremiah walked over to the gun rack. He pulled down a double-barreled shotgun and a box of heavy brass shells. "The storm will last 2 days," Jeremiah said, his voice flat. "That gives us time." "Time for what?" Beatrice asked. Jeremiah cracked the shotgun open and checked the barrels. "Time to turn this cabin into a fortress. You're not the prey anymore, Mrs. Sterling. You're on my mountain now." He tossed a heavy wool blanket to the boy. "Get some sleep, kid. Tomorrow you learn how to load a rifle." The blizzard did not relent for 2 days. It was a white hurricane that buried the world, effectively sealing the three of them inside the 20 by 20-foot log cabin. For Jeremiah, the isolation was standard. For the Sterlings, it was a prison, albeit a warm one. The first morning, Jeremiah woke before dawn, as was his habit. The fire had burned down to embers. He moved silently, adding split pine logs to the stove, the wood popping sharply in the quiet. He looked over at the bunk. Arthur was curled into a ball, his breathing shallow and rhythmic. Beatrice was awake. She sat upright against the rough-hewn wall, wrapped in a buffalo robe, her eyes fixed on the door, as if expecting it to burst open at any second. "Sleep won't kill you, Mrs. Sterling," Jeremiah rumbled, pouring water from a bucket into the coffee pot. "Neither will vigilance," she replied, her voice hoarse from the dry heat of the stove. "I haven't slept more than an hour since we left Cheyenne." Jeremiah grunted and set the pot on the stove. "If Knox is out there in this, he's dead. If he's alive, he's hunkered down. Nobody moves in a whiteout. Not even the devil." The domestic intimacy of the situation was jarring for both of them. Jeremiah Kincaid hadn't shared his space with a soul in 5 years, not since his partner, an old trapper named Jedediah, had died of pneumonia. Beatrice Sterling, conversely, was used to a mansion in Boston and a sprawling ranch outside Cheyenne, staffed by servants who anticipated her every need before she even realized she had one. Here there were no servants. There was only the smell of wood smoke, gun oil, and drying wool. By mid-morning, the tension of inactivity began to fray Beatrice's nerves. She insisted on helping. She picked up the broom, sweeping the dust across the rough plank floor with a determination that bordered on aggressive. Jeremiah sat at the small table, sharpening his bowie knife with a whetstone. Swing, swing, swing. The sound was hypnotic and lethal. "You plan to carve a turkey, Mr. Kincaid?" Beatrice asked sharply, leaning on the broom. "Or are you just trying to make me nervous?" Jeremiah paused, testing the edge with his thumb. A thin line of red appeared on the callus. A dull blade is dangerous, ma'am, just like a dull mind. He looked at Arthur, who was sitting on the floor, tentatively petting Sarge. The massive dog, usually wary of strangers, had rested his heavy head on the boy's small knee. "Boy," Jeremiah called out. Arthur jumped. "Yes, sir." "Come here." Beatrice stiffened, stepping forward. "What do you want with him?" "He's 8 years old, Beatrice. If he can hold a fork, he can hold a knife." "Come here, Arthur." Jeremiah handed the boy a small piece of soft pine and a smaller pocket knife. "Whittle away from yourself, always away. Like this." He demonstrated shaving a curl of wood off a stick. "You're the man of your house now. You got to know how to make things, and how to break things." Beatrice watched her chest tightening. She wanted to snatch the knife away, to tell Jeremiah that Arthur was a sterling destined for boardrooms and ballrooms, not whittling sticks in a shack. But then she saw Arthur's face. The terror that had haunted him for days was gone, replaced by intense focus. He mimicked Jeremiah's movements, his tongue poking out the corner of his mouth. "He never knew his father," Beatrice said softly, the fight leaving her voice. "My son, William. He died at Antietam. Arthur was born 3 months later." Jeremiah stopped whittling. The room went silent save for the wind howling outside. "Antietam," Jeremiah murmured. The name hung in the air like smoke. "I was there. Burnside's Bridge." Beatrice looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. She saw the scar that ran into his hairline, the way his left hand had a slight tremor when he wasn't holding a weapon. "Union, Confederate," Jeremiah said. "3rd Arkansas Infantry." The lines of the Civil War had been drawn in blood, and though the war had been over for more than 20 years, the scars remained. Here they were, the widow of a Union fortune and a rebel deserter trapped together by fate. "I don't care about the color of your coat back then, Mr. Kincaid." Beatrice said, her voice steady. "I care about whether you can keep that boy alive now." Jeremiah looked her in the eye. The animosity faded, replaced by a strange, grudging respect. "I lost everything in that war, Mrs. Sterling. My home, my brothers, my soul mostly. I came up to this mountain so I wouldn't have to kill another man." He looked back at his knife. "But for that boy, I'll make an exception." Later that evening, the dynamic shifted. Jeremiah pulled a hidden trapdoor in the floor, revealing a root cellar. He brought up jars of preserved peaches and a side of smoked elk. Beatrice took over the cooking. She might have been a socialite, but she knew how to season a stew. She found dried sage and wild onions in Jeremiah's pantry. When they sat down to eat, it was the best meal Jeremiah had tasted in a decade. "You cook for a rich woman," Jeremiah commented, tearing into a piece of bread. "I wasn't always rich," Beatrice replied, wiping Arthur's chin. "My father was a baker in St. Louis before I met Archibald. I know how to make flour and water into something edible." For a moment, in the golden light of the kerosene lamp, they looked like a family. A strange, mismatched, rugged family. Jeremiah caught Beatrice watching him, her gaze lingering on his hands. He felt a stir in his chest he thought was long dead. Not just attraction, but the ache of companionship. He quickly shoved it down. "Feelings got you killed." "Eat up," Jeremiah ordered, his voice gruff again. "Storm's breaking tomorrow, and when the wind stops, the noise begins." "What noise?" Arthur asked. Gunfire, Jeremiah said. The silence was deafening. When Jeremiah opened the heavy oak door the next morning, the world had been scrubbed clean. The sky was a piercing, brilliant blue, the sun reflecting off 3 feet of fresh powder with blinding intensity. The pines were bowed heavy with white cloaks. It was beautiful. It was deadly. "Stay inside," Jeremiah commanded, pulling his buffalo coat on. He strapped his gun belt tight, the leather creaking. He checked the load in his Winchester 15 rounds of .44-40 caliber death. "Bar the door behind me. Do not open it unless you hear my voice. If anyone else tries to get in, you use that shotgun." Beatrice nodded, her face pale but set. She held the shotgun Jeremiah had given her, her knuckles white. "Come back," she whispered. "I intend to." Jeremiah stepped out, strapping on his snowshoes. He signaled Sarge to stay. The dog whined but obeyed, sitting guard at the door. Jeremiah moved up the ridge, sticking to the tree line. In the open against the white snow, a man in a dark coat was a perfect target. He moved with the loping gait of a predator, scanning the horizon. He needed to check the carriage. It took him an hour to reach the crash site. The snow had drifted high, burying the dead horse and the driver completely. Only the top of the black carriage was visible, a dark scar on the white landscape. Jeremiah stopped 50 yards out, crouching behind a fallen log. He watched. He waited. A jay squawked in the distance. A clump of snow fell from a branch. Then he saw it. A thin trail of smoke rising from a cluster of rocks about a quarter-mile east of the carriage. A campfire. Amateurs, Jeremiah thought, or they're so confident they don't care. He moved closer, ghosting through the timber. He needed to know numbers. He needed to know who he was fighting. He got within earshot of the rocks. There were 2 of them, scouts. Their horses were picketed nearby, shivering in the cold. The men were huddled around a small fire, drinking coffee. They wore long dusters and heavy Stetson hats. "Tell you Dutch they're dead," one man grumbled. He had a scar running through his eyebrow. "Ain't nobody survived 2 nights in that blow without shelter." "Knox says he wants bodies," the other man Dutch replied. "He was cleaning a Henry repeater rifle. We don't get paid the bonus unless we bring back the ring the old lady wears. And the kid's head." Jeremiah's grip on his rifle tightened until the wood groaned. The kid's head. These weren't men. They were animals. "Well, the carriage is empty," the first man said. "Tracks are covered by the storm. We got to fan out. Check the ravines." "There's a cabin," Dutch said, pulling a map from his pocket. "Old survey map shows a trapper shack about 2 miles up the creek, called Dead Man's Drop. We check that." "Just the 2 of us." "Nah." Dutch spat tobacco into the snow. "We signal the rest of the boys. If they're there, we pin 'em down until the colonel gets here with the Gatling." Gatling. The word hit Jeremiah like a physical blow. A Gatling gun. Knox had brought a machine gun to a manhunt. That weapon could turn his log cabin into splinters in under a minute. There would be no siege. It would be a slaughter. Jeremiah knew he couldn't let these 2 report back. He had to act. Now. He assessed the distance. 80 yards. Easy for a rifleman of his caliber. But a gunshot would echo for miles. It would alert anyone else nearby. He set the rifle down gently in the snow and pulled his knife. He also unholstered the Colt, holding it in his left hand. He began to crawl. He moved like the wind, silent and invisible. He flanked them, coming up behind the rock outcropping. He was 10 feet away now. He could smell their unwashed bodies and the cheap tobacco. Jeremiah stood up. "Morning, boys," he said. The two men spun around, hands going for their guns. They were fast, but they were startled. Jeremiah didn't shoot. He threw the heavy Bowie knife. It flipped once in the air and buried itself to the hilt in the chest of the first man. He dropped without a sound. Dutch, the second man, cleared leather with his revolver. Jeremiah stepped forward, batting the gun arm aside with his left hand and driving a right hook into Dutch's jaw. The man crumbled. Jeremiah was on him instantly, a knee on his chest, the barrel of his peacemaker pressed against Dutch's forehead. "Don't," Jeremiah whispered. Dutch froze, eyes wide, blood trickling from his lip. Who are you?" "I'm the landlord," Jeremiah growled. "How many men?" Dutch smirked, revealing yellow teeth. "You're dead, mountain man. You got no idea." Jeremiah cocked the hammer. Click. "How? Many?" 12, Dutch spat. "Plus the colonel. And the gun. You can't stop it." Jeremiah's eyes were cold. "Maybe not, but you won't see it." He pistol-whipped the man, knocking him unconscious. He couldn't kill him in cold blood. The war had sickened him of that. But he couldn't let him go. He dragged both men, the dead one and the living one, into a deep ravine and covered them with snow and brush. It wouldn't hide them forever, but it would buy time. He rifled through Dutch's pockets and found the map. He also found a stick of dynamite. Dynamite. A plan began to form in Jeremiah's mind. A desperate, suicidal plan. He grabbed the Henry repeater and the ammo from the saddlebags, then slapped the horses on the rump to send them running down the mountain. That would confuse the trackers. Jeremiah turned back toward the cabin. He ran now, his lungs burning in the thin air. The clock was ticking. 12 men, a Gatling gun, and they knew where the cabin was. He burst through the cabin door 20 minutes later, startling Beatrice. She raised the shotgun, then lowered it when she saw his face. "Pack your things," Jeremiah said, breathing hard. "Warm clothes only. Food, ammo." "What happened?" Beatrice asked, grabbing Arthur. "They found the carriage. They know about the cabin," Jeremiah said, moving to the fireplace and kicking sand over the coals. "There's an army coming, Mrs. Sterling, and they brought a cannon." "Where are we going?" Arthur asked, his voice trembling. Jeremiah looked at the boy, then at the high peaks visible through the window, the jagged, inhospitable summits of the Bighorns. "Up," Jeremiah said. "We're going to the sky shelf. It's the only place they can't bring that gun." "That's suicide," Beatrice gasped. "It's 10,000 feet up. There's nothing there but ice." "There's caves," Jeremiah said, "and there's a choke point, a narrow trail where numbers don't matter." He looked at her, his eyes intense. "I can't fight 12 men and a Gatling gun here. They'll burn us out. But up there, I can hunt them." He grabbed his gear. "We leave in 5 minutes. Pray your shoes hold out, Beatrice, because if we stop, we die." The mountain did not want them there. That was the only conclusion Jeremiah could draw as they ascended past the timberline. The air grew thin, a knife in the lungs with every inhale. The trees, once towering ponderosas, had shrunk to twisted, gnarled scrub pines, bent double by the relentless wind. Above them loomed the grey granite face of the peak, a sheer wall of rock capped with eternal ice. They had been climbing for 6 hours. Beatrice was stumbling. Her fine leather shoes were shredded wrapped now in strips of canvas Jeremiah had cut from a tarp. She didn't complain, but Jeremiah could hear the hitch in her breath, the terrifying rattle of exhaustion. Arthur was riding on Jeremiah's back, strapped in with a makeshift harness of rope and leather. The boy was dead weight, but Jeremiah, fueled by adrenaline and a lifetime of hard labor, powered through the snowdrifts that reached his thighs. "We stop here," Jeremiah yelled over the wind. They had reached the Devil's Spine, a narrow ridge of rock no wider than a wagon, dropping away 1,000 feet on either side into mist-filled chasms. At the end of the spine was the sky shelf, a flat plateau tucked under an overhang of the cliff face. It was a natural fortress accessible only by this single suicidal path. Jeremiah ushered them into a shallow cave at the back of the shelf. It was dry, protected from the wind, and smelled of bat guano and old dust. He gently lowered Arthur to the ground. The boy was shivering violently. Hypothermia was setting in. "Strip him," Jeremiah ordered, shucking off his heavy coat. Beatrice looked at him, scandalized even in her fear. "What? Wet clothes kill," Jeremiah barked. "Get him out of those layers. Wrap him in the dry blankets. I'll get a fire started. Smokeless. Dry wood only." Jeremiah moved to the back of the cave, where he knew a stash of driftwood and dried moss lay left by him 3 winters ago. He built a small, intense fire against the back wall, feeding it stick by stick. The heat began to radiate, bouncing off the stone. Beatrice had stripped Arthur to his underclothes and wrapped him in the heavy wool quilts. She sat rocking him, her own teeth chattering. Jeremiah looked at her. Her lips were blue. She was shaking so hard she couldn't hold a cup of snow he'd melted. "You too, Beatrice," Jeremiah said, his voice softer this time. I can't," she stammered. "You die. He dies," Jeremiah said simply. He moved over to her. "This ain't society, Beatrice. This is survival. Get under the blankets with the boy. Share the heat. It's the only way." She hesitated, then nodded. She shed her heavy, sodden coat and the outer layers of her dress, crawling under the pile of furs with her grandson. Jeremiah sat opposite them, feeding the fire, watching the entrance. An hour later, the shivering had stopped. Arthur was asleep. Beatrice was awake, watching Jeremiah through the flames. The firelight softened the hard lines of her face, revealing the woman she might have been before the money. And the grief hardened her. "Why do you live like this?" she asked softly. "Alone. Like a ghost." Jeremiah stared into the coals. "Ghosts don't hurt people, Beatrice. Men do." He pulled a flask from his pocket, taking a small sip of whiskey before offering it to her. She took it, her fingers brushing his. The contact sent a jolt through him that had nothing to do with the cold. "After the war," Jeremiah began, the words coming out slow. "I came home to Arkansas. My farm was burned. My wife, Martha, she died of typhoid while I was fighting in Virginia. I had nothing, and I had a head full of noise. Screams. Cannons." He tapped his temple. "The only place the noise stops is up here, where the wind is louder than the memories." Beatrice took a drink, coughing slightly as the liquor burned her throat. "I have everything," she whispered. "Houses in 3 states, a bank account that could buy a country. And I have never been more lonely than I was in that mansion." She looked at Arthur. "My husband, Archibald. He loved the money more than he loved us. He built an empire of copper and steel. He wanted Arthur to be a king, but I just want him to be a boy." Jeremiah looked at her, seeing the fierce, protective love in her eyes. It was the same look the mothers in the wolf packs had. "He's a good boy," Jeremiah said. "He didn't cry once on the climb. "He's terrified," Beatrice said. "He thinks he's going to die." Jeremiah leaned forward, his face close to hers. The smell of wood smoke and lavender water, faint but still there, filled his senses. "He won't die," Jeremiah vowed. "I won't let them take him. Or you." Beatrice looked at his lips, then up to his eyes. For a moment, the gap between the mountain man and the millionairess vanished. There was only a man and a woman in the dark. "Jeremiah," she breathed. He wanted to kiss her. God, he wanted to. But then a sound echoed from outside. Crack. It wasn't a branch. It was a gunshot, a signal shot. Jeremiah was on his feet instantly, the rifle in his hands. The moment was shattered. "They're at the base of the spine," he said, his voice turning into ice. "Get back! Keep the boy down!" He moved to the mouth of the cave. Far below, on the snowy approach to the ridge, he saw them. Dark shapes against the white. And in the center, struggling through the drifts, was a sled pulled by 4 men. They had brought the Gatling gun. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long, bruised shadows across the snow. The temperature was plummeting, but the heat of battle was about to turn the sky shelf into an inferno. Jeremiah lay prone on the edge of the ridge, looking down the devil's spine. The path was narrow, barely 5 feet wide, with a sheer drop on the left and a wall of rock on the right. It was a fatal funnel. He counted them. 11 men left. And Colonel Knox. Knox was easy to spot. He rode a massive black horse that seemed to defy the altitude, and he wore a cavalry officer's greatcoat with a fur collar. He was shouting orders, pointing up at the shelf. "Set up the gun!" Knox roared, his voice carrying clearly in the thin air. "Rake the opening. Keep their heads down while we advance." Jeremiah sighted down the barrel of his Winchester. The range was long, about 400 yards. A difficult shot for most, but Jeremiah wasn't most. He didn't aim for Knox. He aimed for the man setting up the tripod of the Gatling gun. He exhaled. Squeeze. The rifle kicked. A second later, the man at the gun folded over, clutching his thigh. The valley erupted. The bandits scrambled for cover behind rocks and the sled. "Contact!" Knox screamed. "Suppressing fire!" A hail of bullets chipped the rock face around Jeremiah's head. He rolled back, staying low. The heavy thud, thud, thud of buffalo rifles echoed like thunder. "Beatrice!" Jeremiah yelled over the din. She appeared at his side, low to the ground. She had the double-barreled shotgun and a bag of Jeremiah's spare ammunition. She looked terrified, but her hands were steady. "I need you to load," Jeremiah said. "I shoot you, reload. We have to keep up a rate of fire that makes them think there's 5 of us up here." She nodded. "I can do that." Jeremiah popped up again, firing 3 shots in rapid succession. Bang, bang, bang. 2 men yelped. He ducked back down as a bullet whizzed past his ear, cutting a lock of his hair. Beatrice handed him the reloading Henry rifle and took the empty Winchester. Her fingers bled from the cold metal, but she worked the loading gate with mechanical precision. "They're moving the gun!" Jeremiah shouted. Below, 3 men were dragging the Gatling forward, using the sled as a shield. Once they got that gun within 200 yards, they could spray the cave entrance with hundreds of rounds a minute. It would chew through the rock and flesh alike. Jeremiah knew it was time for the gamble. "The dynamite," he muttered. In Part 4, he had taken a stick of dynamite from Dutch. He had buried it in a snowbank halfway down the spine, right next to a precariously balanced boulder the size of a carriage. He had run a long fuse, a primitive line of gunpowder wrapped in oilcloth hidden under the snow. It was a crude setup. If the powder had gotten wet, it wouldn't work. "Cover your ears!" Jeremiah roared at Beatrice. "What? Cover them!" Jeremiah aimed not at a man, but at a small, dark patch of rock 300 yards down the trail, the end of his fuse. He steadied his breathing. The world narrowed to the front sight of his rifle. One shot. If I miss, we die. He fired. A spark. A puff of smoke. For 2 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Jeremiah's heart hammered against his ribs. Then the mountain shook. Boom! The explosion wasn't massive, but it didn't need to be. It shattered the base of the balancing boulder. With a groan that sounded like the earth splitting open, the massive rock tipped. It rolled. It gathered speed, bouncing once, twice, and then crashing directly onto the narrow path, squarely between the Gatling gun and the retreating men. The impact sent a shock wave of snow and debris into the air. The path collapsed. 2 of the gunmen screamed as the ground fell out from under them, sending them tumbling into the abyss below. The Gatling gun caught on the edge of the slide, tipped precariously. "Hold!" Knox's voice screamed from the rear. "Hold the line!" The gun crew abandoned the heavy weapon, scrambling back toward safety as the Gatling slid off the edge, falling thousands of feet into the silence of the canyon. Jeremiah let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "The gun is gone." "Did we win?" Beatrice asked, peering over the rock, her face smudged with soot. "No," Jeremiah said, reloading. "We just made it a fair fight. Now they have to come up here, one by one." But Knox wasn't done. "Kincaid!" The colonel's voice boomed up from the rocks below. He was hiding behind the debris of the rock slide, safe from Jeremiah's angle. "I know you're up there, deserter," Knox yelled. "And I know you have the woman. You think you're a hero. You're protecting a thief." Jeremiah stayed silent. "Tell him Mrs. Sterling," Knox taunted. "Tell your hero where your husband's money really came from. Tell him about the government contracts, the defective rifles that blew up in the hands of soldiers." "My soldiers." Jeremiah stiffened. He looked at Beatrice. She went pale beneath the soot. "What is he talking about?" Jeremiah asked, his voice low. "Archibald," Beatrice stammered, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. "During the war, he sold steel to the army. There were rumors that the metal was brittle, that he cut corners to double the profits." "Rumors!" Knox shouted, as if he could hear them. "My brother died because his barrel split open at Gettysburg. Your husband killed him as surely as if he pulled the trigger. That money is blood. Money. And I am here to collect the debt." Jeremiah looked at Beatrice. The woman he had started to admire, started to care for. "Is it true?" he asked. "I didn't know," she sobbed. "Not at first. By the time I found out he was too powerful, I tried to leave. I tried to give money to charities, but you can't wash blood out of gold, Jeremiah." Jeremiah felt a coldness in his chest that the blizzard couldn't match. He had spent his life running from the men who profited from the war, the men who sat in mansions while boys died in the mud. And now he was risking his life to save the heir to that very fortune. "He's right," Jeremiah whispered. "It is blood money." "But Arthur is innocent." Beatrice grabbed his arm, her grip desperate. "He's just a boy. He doesn't know. Don't let him pay for his grandfather's sins. Please, Jeremiah, Look at him." Jeremiah looked back into the cave. Arthur was awake, peeking out from the blankets, his eyes wide with fear. He held the wooden carving Jeremiah had taught him to make. Jeremiah looked back at the trail. Knox's men were regrouping. They were preparing to rush the narrow path. Jeremiah closed his eyes for a second. He thought of the war. He thought of the dead. Then he thought of the boy's hand in his. "The sins of the father don't pass to the son," Jeremiah said, his voice hardening again. "Not on my mountain." He turned to Beatrice. "We hold the line. But when this is over, Beatrice, that money, it ends. You hear me? It ends." "I promise," she whispered. Jeremiah racked the slide of his rifle. "Here they come." 6 men, led by a screaming lieutenant, charged up the narrow, broken path. It was a desperate, suicidal charge. Jeremiah stood up, exposing himself to fire. He became the machine. He fired, levered, fired, levered. Bang. Click, clack. Bang. Click, clack. 3 men dropped. The others faltered. But then a shot rang out from a different angle. High up, above the cave. Jeremiah felt a sledgehammer hit his shoulder. He spun around, dropping the rifle. "Sniper!" he gasped, falling to his knees. Knox had sent a climber up the sheer face while they were distracted by the rock slide. A man was perched on a ledge 50 feet above the cave, aiming down at them. Beatrice screamed. She raised the shotgun, but the angle was too steep. Jeremiah lay in the snow, blood spreading rapidly across his chest. His right arm was useless. The sniper racked his bolt for the kill shot. "Jeremiah." Beatrice threw herself over him, shielding his body with hers. "No." Jeremiah groaned, trying to push her away. The sniper laughed. "2 birds, 1 stone." He centered his sights on Beatrice's back. The sniper's finger tightened on the trigger. The world seemed to pause the wind, holding its breath as death hovered over Beatrice's back. Jeremiah pinned beneath her. His shoulder shattered and, bleeding into the snow, could do nothing but watch. Then a small, high-pitched scream tore through the silence. "Get away from her, Arthur." The boy had scrambled out of the cave. He wasn't holding a gun. He was holding a piece of firewood, a thick branch of pitch pine, the end blazing with orange fire from their hearth. With a courage born of pure terror, Arthur hurled the burning brand upward toward the sniper's ledge. It was a child's throw, weak and wobbly. It didn't hit the man, but it struck the shelf of snow directly above the sniper's head, showering him with sparks and dislodging a heavy drift of powder. The sniper flinched, blinding white snow falling into his eyes. His rifle jerked, discharging a round that sparked harmlessly off the granite wall, 3 feet to the left of Beatrice. That split second was all Jeremiah needed. Pain was irrelevant. Shock was a luxury he couldn't afford. Jeremiah gritted his teeth so hard he felt a molar crack. He ripped his Colt Peacemaker from its holster with his left hand, his offhand. He didn't aim. He pointed. It was instinct, honed by years of surviving the worst days of American history. Bang. Bang. 2 heavy .45 slugs smashed into the sniper's chest. The man didn't scream. He simply crumpled his rifle, clattering down the cliff face, followed a moment later by his body tumbling silently into the abyss. "Arthur!" Beatrice screamed, scrambling off Jeremiah and grabbing the boy, pulling him behind the cover of the rocks. "Stay down." Jeremiah struggled to sit up. His right arm hanging uselessly at his side, the sleeve of his coat dark with blood. His vision swam. Is he down? He's gone?" Beatrice wept, clutching Arthur, who was shaking violently, the adrenaline crash hitting him. "Jeremiah, you're bleeding to death." "Not yet," Jeremiah rasped. He looked toward the lip of the ridge. "It's not over." It wasn't. A shadow fell across the snow. Colonel Thaddeus Knox pulled himself up over the edge of the sky shelf. He was alone now, his men either dead, fled, or broken by the climb. But Knox was a man possessed. His hat was gone, his fine coat torn, and his eyes burned with a madness that went beyond greed. He held a heavy Remington revolver in each hand. He saw them, the wounded mountain man, the crying woman, the terrified boy. And he smiled. It was a ghastly, triumphant thing. "End of the line," Knox wheezed the thin air, making his chest heave. "Nowhere left to run, Mrs. Sterling." Jeremiah tried to raise his Colt, but his hand was shaking too badly. He had lost too much blood. The gun felt like it weighed 100 pounds. "You've lost Knox," Jeremiah said, his voice a wet growl. "Your men are dead. The gun is gone. Walk away." "Walk away." Knox laughed, a sound like dry branches snapping. "I don't walk away from my due. That boy is worth $5 million. And you're just a complication." Knox raised his right hand, aiming the Remington squarely at Jeremiah's head. "No." Beatrice stood up. She didn't have a weapon. She had dropped the shotgun during the sniper attack. She stood up with nothing but her dignity. She placed herself between the gun and Jeremiah. "Beatrice, don't," Jeremiah groaned. "You want blood, Thaddeus?" she said, her voice surprisingly steady, echoing off the cold stone. "Take mine. But you look at me when you do it. You look at the wife of the man you called partner." Knox hesitated. For a flicker of a second, the conditioning of a gentleman warred with the instincts of a killer. "Step aside, Beatrice. I only need the boy." "You'll have to shoot through me," she said. "Fine," Knox sneered. His finger whitened on the trigger. Jeremiah looked at the scene. He saw the woman who had lived in silk and velvet, standing like a monolith of granite. He saw the boy, Arthur, peeking out from behind the rocks, his eyes wide. Not again, Jeremiah thought. I won't watch another innocent die. Jeremiah didn't try to shoot. He knew he would miss. Instead, he whistled. It was a sharp, piercing, two-note command. From the darkness of the cave, a grey blur launched itself. Sarge, the massive dog, had been commanded to stay to guard the rear, but the whistle released him. Sarge hit Knox in the chest like a cannonball of fur and muscle. Knox fired the bullet, going wild into the sky. He went down hard on the ice, the dog's jaws clamping onto his forearm. Knox screamed, thrashing, trying to bring his other gun to bear on the animal. "Sarge off!" Jeremiah yelled, forcing himself to his feet. Knox kicked the dog, sending Sarge skidding across the ice with a yelp. Knox scrambled up, bleeding furious, raising his gun toward the dog to finish him. Jeremiah was there. He slammed into Knox with his good shoulder. The momentum carried them both toward the edge of the devil's spine. They grappled, slipping on the blood-slicked ice. Knox was stronger, uninjured, but Jeremiah was fighting with the desperation of a dying man. Knox dropped one gun and clawed at Jeremiah's throat, his thumbs digging into the windpipe. "Die, you hillbilly filth! Die!" Jeremiah's vision began to black out. He couldn't breathe. He felt his knees buckling. He looked past Knox's shoulder and saw the drop 1,000 feet of empty air. "If I go, he goes." Jeremiah let go of Knox's coat. He reached up, grabbed Knox's wrists, and instead of pushing him away, He pulled him close. He stepped backward toward the void. Knox's eyes went wide. "What are you doing?" "Taking you to hell," Jeremiah whispered. Jeremiah threw his weight backward, dragging them both over the lip of the cliff. "Jeremiah!" Beatrice screamed. As they tipped over the edge, Jeremiah felt his boot catch on a root, a gnarled ancient pine root jutting out from the rock face. He hooked his leg instinctually. The jolt nearly tore his leg from its socket. He hung upside down, suspended over the abyss. Knox did not catch a root. Jeremiah held on to Knox's coat for 1 second. The colonel dangled there, staring up at Jeremiah, his face a mask of pure horror. The madness was gone, replaced by the realization of his own mortality. "Help me," Knox begged. "I'll give you half. I'll give you everything." Jeremiah looked at the man. He thought about the dead driver. He thought about the defective rifles at Gettysburg. He thought about the boy. "I don't want your money." Jeremiah groaned, his grip failing. "I want peace." His fingers slipped. Colonel Thaddeus Knox fell. He didn't scream. He just shrank smaller and smaller until he was swallowed by the mist of the valley floor. Jeremiah hung there, the blood rushing to his head, his vision fading. He was slipping. The root was cracking. "It's okay," he thought. "I did it. They're safe." Then he felt hands. Small, strong hands gripping his ankle, then larger hands gripping his belt. "Pull, Arthur! Pull!" Beatrice was screaming. They dragged him back. Inch by agonizing inch, the old woman and the young boy hauled the broken mountain man back onto the solid rock of the sky shelf. They collapsed in a heap, gasping, crying alive. The descent took 2 days. They made a travois sled for Jeremiah out of the shattered remains of the Gatling gun crate. Beatrice and Arthur pulled him down the mountain, retracing their steps through the snow. When they reached the town of 10 Sleep, it caused a sensation. The local sheriff, a man named Ed Halloway, found the trio stumbling onto the main street at dawn. He recognized the Sterling woman from the newspapers. He recognized Jeremiah Kincaid from the legends. A doctor was summoned from Casper. Jeremiah lay in a fever for a week, hovering between this world and the next. Beatrice never left his bedside. She paid for the best medicine, the best food, the best care gold could buy. When Jeremiah finally woke, the snow was melting. The Chinook winds had come. He opened his eyes to see Arthur sitting in a chair, whittling a piece of cedar. The boy looked different, taller. The baby fat was gone from his face, replaced by a lean toughness. "You're awake," Arthur said, dropping the knife and running to the bed. "Hey, kid," Jeremiah croaked. Beatrice entered a moment later. She looked like a queen again, wearing a new dress, her hair pinned up. But her hands were rough, chapped from the cold and the ropes of the sled. "The doctor says you'll keep the arm," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Though you won't be winning any quick draw contests. Never liked him anyway." Jeremiah smiled weakly. "I have to go back," Beatrice said softly. "The lawyers are in Cheyenne. The board of directors is trying to seize the company. I have to fight them. For Arthur." Jeremiah nodded. "You go. Give 'em hell." "Come with us," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a plea. "Come to Boston, or the ranch. Anywhere. I can make you comfortable. You'll never have to freeze again." Jeremiah looked out the window at the Bighorn Mountains, purple and majestic in the distance. He looked at Beatrice, a woman he had come to love in a way he didn't think possible. But he was a creature of the high lonesome. A mansion would be a cage just as surely as a prison cell. "I can't, Beatrice," he said. "I don't fit down there. My ghosts are up here." She leaned in and kissed him. It was a kiss of gratitude, of sorrow, and of deep, abiding affection. "You are no ghost, Jeremiah Kincaid. You are the best man I have ever known." They left 3 days later. Before the carriage pulled away, a new one guarded by 4 U.S. Marshals. Arthur ran back to Jeremiah. He handed him something. It was the wood carving. It was rough, clumsy, but undeniable. It was a bear, or maybe a dog. "It's Sarge," Arthur said seriously. "So you don't get lonely." Jeremiah took it, his throat tight. "You keep your knife sharp, Arthur Sterling, and watch your back." "I will," the boy said. "I promise." The Sterling rescue became a footnote in the history of the Wyoming Territory, often overshadowed by the Johnson County War that followed a few years later. Beatrice Sterling did not just fight the board. She crushed them. She took control of the Sterling mining combine and spent the next 20 years liquidating its assets to fund the Sterling Kincaid Trust, an organization dedicated to providing pensions for war widows and orphans regardless of which side their husbands fought on. Arthur Sterling never became a copper tycoon. He used his inheritance to become one of the West's first conservationists, instrumental in establishing the national forest boundaries in Wyoming. As for Jeremiah Kincaid, he never left the Bighorns. He rebuilt his cabin. He trapped a little, fished a lot. Locals said that every summer, a wealthy man from the east would come up the mountain with his family, and they would sit on the porch of the old trapper's shack, drinking coffee and watching the sunset. When Jeremiah finally died in 1908, they found him in his rocking chair, facing the peaks. On the mantel next to a rusted Colt Peacemaker was a small, clumsily whittled wooden dog. His grave marker paid for by an anonymous donor lies in a small plot near 10 Sleep. It reads simply, "Jeremiah Kincaid. He held the line." And that is the legend of the Sterling Rescue. It's a reminder that in the Wild West, the greatest treasures weren't gold or silver, but courage, loyalty, and the will to do the right thing when the odds were impossible. Jeremiah Kincaid didn't just save a family that winter. He redeemed his own soul. If you enjoyed this story of survival and grit, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more true-to-life tales from the American frontier, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a video. What do you think? Did Jeremiah make the right choice staying on the mountain? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next trail.